Victorian Britain was a strange time. This was the age when people started using steam engines and microscopes, and they were learning things about science. At the same time, people were scared of things they could not see. Even though it seemed like everything was getting better, people still believed that bad things were there. To people who lived in Victorian Britain, things like ghosts and demons and witches and vampires were not just stories. They were real. People thought they were hiding somewhere waiting to do harm. Victorian Britain was a time when people thought that ghosts and vampires and all these other things were threats that nobody could stop. This weird mix of faith and science gave birth to a weird character, the religious monster hunter. This guy was really something. He fought against the stuff with prayer in one hand and medical tools in the other. The religious monster hunter was a man who used faith and science to get the job done. He was a monster hunter who was not afraid to use prayer and medical instruments to fight against darkness. These men looked like priests, scholars or doctors during the day. They spent their time studying about God, the body and life in general. They gave talks in churches and universities, talking about what's right and wrong. When night came, they did something very different. The men went to villages, old empty houses and spooky cemeteries, because people told them about strange things happening. They heard about people being taken over by spirits, ghosts and creatures that come back from the dead. To these men, bad things were really happening. They were not ideas. This thing was like something that could get inside people's bodies and make them very sick. It was also very bad for people's spirits. It could spread from person to person, like a really bad illness. The disease was a problem that could infect people's bodies. It could corrupt people's souls. The disease could spread like a disease. In some faraway places in Britain and Ireland, people still believed in spirits and vampires a long time ago, even up to the 19th century. When something weird happened, like kids talking in voices or animals dying and nobody knew why, or it looked like shadows were moving around by themselves, they would call a priest to come to their house. The priest would do an exorcism, which is a special kind of ritual, and it was not just something they did a long time ago, but something they still did. They would sprinkle water around, say, prayers, and press special things against the person's body, who was shaking with fear. They wrote down what happened so they could look at it again later, like a story, and they did not think it was just made up, but something that happened to people. The line between religious rite and scientific investigation was thin. People then were really into spiritualism. This was happening at the time in Victorian society. Seances were super popular. Lots of people went to them. You would see families who were sad because they lost someone, people who wanted to learn, and even scientists who were respected. These meetings took place in rooms where people would whisper prayers and you could hear knocking sounds. The people who led these meetings, called mediums, said they could talk to spirits and see things that are not visible to us. Some of these mediums were fake. Others really believed they had special powers. These spiritualists thought of themselves as explorers of things we cannot see. They were trying to learn about a different world that is just out of our reach, a world that is not part of our everyday reality. Spiritualism was a big part of this. People who were ordinary men and women started to look into things that were not normal. The supernatural was something that they were very interested in. They wrote down things that they saw, like hauntings. They made lists of the ghosts that they saw. They also talked about what these spirits might be. Were they the souls of people who had died, or were they some kind of energy that we do not understand yet? They even used tools when they had meetings to talk to spirits. They used cameras and special machines that could measure things, along with things like crosses and prayer books. It was strange to see faith and science being used together like this. But people were curious, and they were also scared, so they were trying to figure out what was going on. The supernatural was something that people were very curious about. They wanted to know what these spirits were, and what they could do. Abraham Van Helsing is a cool character who shows us this way of thinking. He was in Bram Stoker's book Dracula back in 1897. Abraham Van Helsing was not a guy who hunted vampires. He was a doctor. He thought about questions and he knew a lot about religion. He saw being a vampire as something that was both very bad for your body and a kind of curse. Victorian London was a city built on progress and rot in equal measure. Beneath the gaslit streets and grand lecture halls, another world existed, hidden behind locked doors and heavy curtains. This was the world of the anatomist, the surgeon, and the early pathologist. Men who sought to understand life by cutting into death. Men who believed the human body was not sacred, but a mechanism to be opened, catalogued, and mastered. In the 19th century, London became the beating heart of medical experimentation, and its pulse was measured in blood. By day, these men appeared respectable. They wore tailored coats, carried notebooks, and lectured to eager students in clean halls filled with chalk dust and ambition. But when night fell, the true work began. Candles were lit, aprons were tied, knives were sharpened. In cramped rooms thick with the smell of preservatives and decay, bodies were opened piece by piece in the name of knowledge. This was not medicine as we know it today. It was surgery without anaesthesia, anatomy without consent, and experimentation without limits. The surgeon's day often began at dawn in the hospital wards. Patients lay crowded together, many suffering from injuries, infections, or diseases medicine barely understood. Surgery was brutal and fast. Speed meant survival. Limbs were amputated in minutes to prevent gangrene. Tumours were cut out with little understanding of what caused them. The screams echoed through corridors, and blood soaked the wooden floors. Surgeons prided themselves on how quickly they could work, not how gently. Pain was considered unavoidable, even useful, a sign that the body was still alive. Once the living were tended to, attention turned to the dead. Cadavers were essential, and they were always in short supply. Bodies arrived quietly, often at night, delivered by resurrectionists or hospital porters who asked no questions. These corpses were the true textbooks of Victorian medicine. They were stripped, examined, measured, and cut open under flickering candlelight. Each incision was a step toward understanding, or so the anatomist believed. Among these men, one name loomed larger than most: John Hunter. Born in 1728, Hunter became one of the most influential surgeons and anatomists in history. He believed that knowledge could only be gained through direct observation and experimentation. Books were not enough. The body itself was the answer. Over his lifetime, Hunter collected thousands of specimens, human and animal alike. Bones, organs, malformed fetuses, preserved limbs, entire skeletons suspended in glass jars. His collection grew into something monstrous and magnificent at the same time. Hunter dissected relentlessly. He studied wounds, diseases, and deformities. He experimented on animals and humans, blurring the line between healing and obsession. Rumours spread that he attempted transplantation of tissues, grafting parts from one body to another. Others whispered that he sought reanimation, that he believed life itself might be coaxed back into dead flesh through manipulation of nerves and blood. Whether true or not, the stories clung to him, fueled by the eerie reality of his workspaces. His London home became something infamous: the Hunterian Museum, a private cabinet of horrors hidden behind the walls of a respectable residence. Visitors described rooms lined with shelves of glass jars, each holding a fragment of life preserved in alcohol. Skulls stared from every angle. Animals frozen in unnatural poses revealed their inner workings. Human remains were displayed not with reverence, but with scientific curiosity. To enter was to step into a temple dedicated to the anatomy of existence itself. These collections were not merely morbid curiosities, they were tools. Early pathologists used them to trace disease, to compare healthy organs with corrupted ones, to search for patterns hidden beneath flesh. They believed illness was something tangible, something that could be isolated and named, if only it were examined closely enough. Every preserved lung blackened by soot, every liver swollen with disease, brought them closer to answers that medicine desperately needed. Yet the cost was immense. The men who worked in these rooms were often covered in blood long after the sun had set. Their hands were stained, their clothes reeking of preservatives and decay. Infection was a constant threat. A single cut could mean a death. Many surgeons died young, claimed by the very diseases they sought to understand. Still they continued. Progress demanded sacrifice. A world where science advanced not through comfort, but through confrontation with death itself. The anatomists and surgeons of Victorian London did not fear the body. They opened it, catalogued it, and searched it for truth. The year is 1348. The air hangs heavy with decay and dread. Across Europe, the Black Death spreads like wildfire, cutting through towns and villages with the same quiet finality as a scythe through wheat. Entire families vanish in a week. Streets once filled with the sounds of merchants and laughter now echo only with the cries of the dying and the toll of the church bell. Amid this nightmare, a lone figure walks the cobblestones, cloaked in black, masked like a great bird of ill omen. He is the plague doctor, the man who dares to face the invisible enemy. Each morning begins before the sun, in a dimly lit room filled with the scent of vinegar and burnt herbs. The doctor rises in silence. His preparations are both ritual and defence. Layer by layer he covers himself in his armour against death. First the heavy linen undershirt, soaked in oils thought to ward off miasma. Then the waxed leather cloak, thick and stiff, sealing his body from the poisoned air. He ties gloves tight around his wrists, tucks his trousers into high boots, and anoints the seams with animal fat or camphor. Every motion is deliberate, born from fear and necessity. On the table before him rests the instrument of his identity, the mask, long beaked, glass-eyed, and lined inside with a mixture of herbs, flowers, and vinegar-soaked sponges. Lavender, mint, roses, cloves, each chosen not only for its scent, but for its symbolic power against corruption. He places it over his face, fastening the straps, and breathes through the narrow beak. The world outside now comes through a thin, filtered hiss. The mask is his protection, and his prison. With a wide-brimmed hat atop his head and a staff in his hand, he steps out into the grey morning. The streets of the city are silent, but alive with suffering. Doors marked with red crosses tell the story of homes struck by plague. Windows are shuttered. Animals lie dead in the gutters. A death cart creaks past, driven by men with faces wrapped in cloth, calling out for the dead. The doctor walks carefully, avoiding puddles that might carry disease, his staff tapping against the stones like the ticking of a clock. He moves through the fog, part man, part myth, a solitary figure between the living and the dead. His first stop is a narrow house where the smell of sickness leaks into the street. Inside, the air is thick and hot. A family lies huddled on straw mattresses, pale and trembling. The father's skin is mottled, his neck swollen with dark lumps the size of eggs. The doctor kneels beside him, inspecting the buboes that mark the disease. With a gloved hand, he touches the fevered skin, then dips a knife into vinegar and lances the swelling. The fluid that spills out is black and foul. He applies a poultice of onions and herbs, a desperate measure born from the wisdom of ancient texts. The patient groans. The doctor knows it will not save him, but he does it anyway. He must. It is his duty, his burden, his attempt to impose order upon chaos. Outside, he records the man's name in a ledger. Each page fills with ink and sorrow. Some names have no one left to speak them. As he moves from house to house, his staff points, prods, and protects. He does not touch the people unless he must. Even the desperate keep their distance. To see the beaked mask approaching is both relief and terror. He is hope and death made flesh. By midday, the doctor returns to his quarters. His gloves and cloak reek of smoke and sickness. On his work table, Jars and mortars lie scattered among bundles of herbs and scraps of parchment. Here he becomes part alchemist, part scholar. He mixes remedies drawn from the wisdom of Galen and Avicenna, grinding dried roots into powders, boiling wine with myrrh, and preparing theriac, a syrup of honey and exotic spices once thought to cure all poison. He burns juniper and sulphur in the corners of the room, letting the smoke curl through the rafters in the hope it will cleanse the air of invisible death. His tools glint in the candlelight, knives, needles, leeches in glass jars. He writes his findings in Latin, noting how the disease spreads along the trade roads, how rats and filth seem always to precede the sickness. His mind teeters between reason and despair. He feels he is touching the edge of understanding, and yet the plague continues, mocking his efforts. Beyond the city walls, pits are dug so wide and deep, they seem to swallow the earth itself. The death carts unload their cargo beneath a veil of smoke. The doctor stands at the edge, inspecting corpses, searching for patterns in their suffering. He writes of bile, of imbalance, of humours gone foul. He does not yet know the truth, that the plague rides in the bodies of fleas and rats. But his observations, his careful notes will one day guide those who come after him. In the cold stillness before dawn, the city of London lies wrapped in fog, its gas lamps glowing like faint candles against the encroaching dark. Death has long been a companion here, an old friend in narrow streets and overcrowded slums. But for some, death is not an ending, it is a beginning. This is the hidden world of the resurrectionists, men who made their living by stealing the dead. Their trade fueled the rise of modern medicine, and their shadows stretched across every graveyard, from Whitechapel to Edinburgh. Today, we walk step by step through the daily life of a Victorian grave robber, a man who moved between worlds, feared by the living and needed by surgeons hungry for knowledge. The day begins not at sunrise, but at sundown. A resurrectionist sleeps through the daylight hours, hiding in cheap boarding houses or cramped tavern rooms where he will not be recognised. By early evening he rises, dresses in dark woolen coats and heavy boots fitted with cloth wraps to muffle footsteps, and pockets a short knife for cutting rope, canvas or the occasional restraint. He straps on thick gloves, sometimes leather, sometimes waxed, to ward against soil, infection, and the cold weight of his nocturnal work. Some wear scarves across their faces to avoid recognition. Others use soot to dull the shine of their skin. In this era, to be known as a body snatcher is to be hunted. Preparation begins long before a shovel strikes the earth. Information is everything. Resurrectionists gather in taverns, working among the gossip of undertakers, grave diggers and hospital porters. They learn which funerals have taken place that day, which bodies were young, healthy, and suitable for anatomical study, and which graveyards lack the protection of watchmen or iron mort safes. Every detail matters. A fresh corpse is valuable. A decomposing one, almost worthless. As the sun sets fully, they gather their tools, long-handled shovels, wooden spades that make less noise than metal, iron hooks and thick sacks or canvas wraps used to transport the body. A lantern with a shielded flame casts only the smallest circle of light. In the distance, church bells toll the passing hour. It is time. Graveyards in early Victorian Britain are unsettling places. The ground is uneven, churned by decades of burials. The stones lean like crooked teeth. Fog rolls through the tombs, muting all sound. But danger is everywhere. Volunteer watch societies patrol the grounds, armed with truncheons and pistols. Some graveyards employ large, aggressive dogs. Others have traps or tripwires that alert nearby wardens. And then there are mort safes, heavy iron cages locked over fresh graves to keep resurrectionists out. Yet even these can be bypassed with enough time and skill. A resurrectionist rarely works alone. In groups of 2 or 3, they move silently among the stones, counting their steps, whispering only when needed. At a chosen grave, they begin by clearing the topsoil. They do not exhume the coffin fully. That takes too long. Instead, they dig only at the head end, creating a narrow trench just wide enough to reach the coffin lid with a hook. By lantern light, they work like ghosts, turning soil, shushing each other, listening always for the snap of a twig or the clack of a watchman's boot. Once the wood is exposed, the lid is cracked open with a crowbar. The smell of earth and decay rises, but they are used to it. A rope is slipped around the corpse's chest or under the arms, and with coordinated heaving, they lift the body through the narrow opening, disturbing as little soil as possible. Clothing is stripped and discarded. Anatomists are interested only in the body, not the garments. The corpse is wrapped tightly in canvas and placed in a long sack. The entire process may take 15 minutes if done well. Now comes the most dangerous part: escape. Moving through the night with the weight of a man over one's shoulder is slow, clumsy, and loud. Watchmen often lurk near graveyard gates, so resurrectionists find alternative exits. Broken fences, holes in stone walls, or narrow alleys. A single cough or misstep can doom the entire team. If caught, they face imprisonment, violence from angry mobs, or even death. But if they succeed, the reward is substantial. A fresh, healthy body can fetch the equivalent of several months' wages. The delivery usually happens before dawn. Medical schools and private anatomy rooms operate behind locked doors, their windows shuttered. Surgeons and professors wait inside with coin in hand. They do not ask where the body came from. They do not look the resurrectionists in the eye. They simply count the payment, inspect the quality, and carry the corpse to the dissection room. It is a transaction devoid of ritual, morality, or sentiment. Knowledge has a price, and these men are willing to pay it. By sunrise, the resurrectionists have vanished back into the alleys, returning to cheap lodgings to sleep away the day.